At this point in the franchise, Five Nights at Freddy's could possibly be split into two distinct timelines, essentially FNAF 1 to Ultimate Custom Night and then Help Wanted moving onward, mainly because Help Wanted establishes that it's possible that the earlier FNAF games are made by an indie dev in-universe. So if we can solve what that first set of games is trying to say, then either we solve the timeline up to Ultimate Custom Night, or we solve what Fazbear Entertainment is trying to tell the public in the new timeline. Either way, I think it's a win-win. So for the next 4 videos, like I announced last week, we are going to be doing our best to create a definitive FNAF timeline from FNAF 1 all the way to Ultimate Custom Night, using only information found in the games. So, slices, put on your aprons, this is gonna be a big one. To start, I want to try to comb through every single piece of lore we can pull from the games and the Scott Games website. So we're going to start with FNAF 1, moving probably to FNAF 4, and we'll see how far we can get by combing through these games and pulling out everything we can find. We could go in the order of the timeline chronology, but we aren't sure what the timeline is yet. So we'll go in order of release, starting with FNAF 1. Do you want to go down already? Is that better? Are you a baby? Ow, not a baby, not a baby, I release you. As far as lore goes, the things FNAF 1 brings to the table is pretty sparse. To be fair, I don't think Scott expected this to be a 10+ year franchise when he released this game, so he just gave us a few details to kind of chew on a mystery while we played. But there is still lore here to get, so we'll start with the most direct lore we can find, written down lore. The game opens with the classic Help Wanted advert, which is pretty devoid of useful information. It more so just specifies exactly what's going on for the player's sake. At the end, we get a paycheck of $120.50 from Fazbear Entertainment to a Mike Schmidt on November 13th, XX. This could be very important, so put a pin in that paycheck for now. Actually, let's do one better. The paycheck is dated November 13th, and typically in the States, payday is Friday and your checks are dated as such. So we can use the idea that since November 13th is on a Friday, we can try to figure out what year that was, or at least get a range of possible years it could be. I'll explain later when we go into the evidence, but just letting you know now, the range is going to be from the 70s to 2023 for reasons we'll explain. So using this paycheck and calendars of the last few decades, we can deduce that FNAF 1 likely took place in one of the following years: 1970, 1981, 1987, oh god, we'll get into that one, 1992, 1998, 2009, 2015, or 2020. Okay, so again, pin in that for now, let's move on. We get a pink slip to get fired at the end of Custom Night, with a reason that reads, tampering with the animatronics, general unprofessionalism, odor. So we'll put a pin in that could be important. Now onto the real meat of the lore from paper in this game. Occasionally throughout the night, when this poster is looked at on the cameras, it can sometimes turn into a newspaper article describing events that took place at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The 4 articles that can occur have some key details, and you can read them in full if you'd like, but in the interest of time, the takeaways for the lore here are that 5 children went missing at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Later on, the animatronic mascots started to reek like dead bodies. And something really important that I brought up in my last video that I didn't hear a lot of people talk about recently, the murderer is found and arrested. Look closely. The suspect has been charged. In the article titled, 5 children now reported missing, suspect convicted. This would have radical implications for the timeline if William is in jail, or at least someone took the fall for him. But again, we don't know who William or Henry is yet in this franchise, so for now, we'll just mark that whoever did the missing child incident either went to jail or someone went to jail for them. Also, for the record, it mentions in the article that the restaurant then closes down with the hopes of being opened again. Up next for the lore is the phone guy dialogues. Every night starts with a pre-recorded message from, well, phone guy. We don't have his real name. And according to him, he's the last guy that took the position before we slot in that Monday. These are pretty long and typically are mostly filled with game mechanics, but there is some lore details in there that we can pin from it. Whether or not he's exaggerating, he says, if I were forced to sing those same stupid songs every night for 20 years without ever getting a bath, I'd be pretty irritated too. So 1, they stink, and 2, this franchise might have been already existing for 20 years at this point, so possible pin there. They used to walk around during the day until the bite of 87, which took out someone's frontal lobe. Very big pin there, that's probably important. And also the bite of 87 is in the past tense, and he presumably dies at the end of the week right before we arrive, judging from the sound of his last phone call. Now, Point of order, we have to be careful with what this guy says, as several times in the phone calls he'll say something that sounds important or deadly, and then correct himself and say, oh, but legally that's not the case. So it definitely seems like he's watching what he says, because Fazbear Entertainment might fire him if he goes out of line or says too much truth that there is. Furthermore, his claim that they attack us because they think we're an endoskeleton is pretty flimsy at best. We're pretty sure that they're attacking us in the same way that they were killed in life, so we can pretty much disregard that reason right away. But it is interesting to note that supposedly this game takes place at least 20 years after the beginning of the franchise, and that the Bite of 87 took place during the day. And the fact that it was referred to as the Bite of 87, not that really bad bite a couple months ago, we can assume that this game doesn't take place in 1987 or before, so we can strike those years from the list of years we have prior. But also, because the franchise has been around for around 20 years, we can't go much past 1987. So our new list of possible years is 1992, 1998, and 2009. I know 2009 is past 2007, but it's close enough that the exaggeration of 20 years could be used there. So yeah, pins for all of those. As for other important details, the animatronics we see in this game are the main 5: Freddy, Foxy, Bonnie, Chica, and Golden Freddy. The only other lore we could possibly glean from this game is the appearance of Golden Freddy, who very rarely can show up on your screen with the accompanying text, "It's me." You can also get Golden Freddy's jump scare by inputting 1987 into the custom night mode. So this could imply that this yellow version of Freddy is the culprit, but for now, we will pin it. With all that settled, I think that's as much lore as we can get from FNAF 1, so let's move on to FNAF 2. Since this game is the beginning of Scott thinking about the game as a franchise, we get a lot more lore throughout this game specifically. So once again, let's start with the written lore first, since it's the easiest to find. The game opens on this Help Wanted ad, which does mention that this is a grand reopening of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. So pin on that the FNAF 2 location is not the first time this restaurant has been opened, but rather a reopening of a vintage pizzeria. The game ends on another newspaper clipping, this time with a lot of lore. After being open only a few short weeks, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is closing its doors. The new animatronics will be scrapped due to possible malfunctions, however, the original characters are being kept in hopes of a possible reorganization of the company. It's a minor setback, we are confident that we will reopen someday, even if it is with a much smaller budget. CEO, Fazbear Entertainment. Also, the paycheck lists Jeremy Fitzgerald, November 13th, 1987, implying that one of the reasons the restaurant shut down is the Bite of 87 we learned about in the first game. But we're not mixing our ingredients yet, so for now, pin that new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed down in 1987 due to unforeseen events. You get another paycheck to end this game, but it's dated the 12th, which is a Thursday. That's weird, but anyway, pin. Also, upon beating the custom night, you get a pink slip addressed to a Fritz Smith, separate from the person we play as in the main game. Once again for tampering with the animatronics and odor, but this time with a note saying, on his first day, really? Pin there, that feels like it's important. Now that's the written lore. On the phone calls, there's a lot of audio, so here are some key points. The animatronics walk around during the day, have advanced mobility, and have a facial scanning feature that can scan for criminals and other kinds of predators to protect the children at the restaurant. We're the second guard for this position, and the other guard actually transitioned to the day shift right before we joined. The working theory that the phone guy presents for their aggression is that the animatronics were not given a night mode, so they wander the restaurant looking for noise or people because they think they can't find children. And then once again, the theory is once they see you, they think you're an endoskeleton and try to shove you in a suit, which holds even less water with the facial scanning system, but whatever. The older models smell too much to be used, so they're kept in a side room and are used for parts. An investigation started going on that eventually closed the restaurant. Someone tampered with the facial recognition software on the animatronics. The building goes into lockdown because of the investigation, especially to certain employees, and at the same time the day shift opens up for us. The original restaurant of Freddy's was called Fredbear's Family Diner, but it closed a long time ago and they can't get a hold of the owner. And after somebody used a yellow suit that was stored in a back room, all of the animatronics started acting up. There's a lot here, so let's try to sum them up in a few pinnable lore details. How about the original restaurant, Fredbear's Family Diner, closed down years ago. The guy before us switched to the day shift after complaining about the animatronics' aggression. Then somebody tampered with their facial recognition software, somebody put on a yellow suit that was in a back room, and after that, all the animatronics started going haywire. Pin there, and there are 4 older models of Freddy, Chica, Bonnie, and Foxy in the back that are too smelly to be used, but are used for spare parts. pin. So before we start going into miscellaneous lore, there's actually 2 new categories we get to go into starting at FNAF 2, cutscenes and minigames and ScottGames.com teasers. So let's go into cutscenes and minigames because there is a good amount of lore in these in FNAF 2. In Go Go Go, we see a purple guy in the corner and Foxy going to his show several times until eventually going to 5 corpses and ending in a jump scare. So a location with a Pirate's Cove had 5 kids die in it. Pin. In Take Cake to the Children, we see the same purple guy drive up outside of a restaurant and kill a child that was locked out. Pin. In Save Them, we see Withered Freddy being led around by the marionette in the FNAF 2 location. There are 5 corpses scattered around, all the while SAVETHEM is being said. At the very end, you see the text, "You can't," and it ends. Pin. And finally, in Give Gifts, Give Life, we see the marionette give gifts to 4 corpses, then give a Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy mask to the same 4 corpses, with the child in the middle spawning a Golden Freddy jump scare. Pin. Whew, like I said, there's a lot of lore in those minigames, but there's also a cutscene in between nights that has some additional possible lore. In it, we see Freddy in what looks like the FNAF 1 location, looking back and forth, eventually Bonnie then Chica look at you, and then finally the marionette is staring at your face. So that's weird, we'll put a pin in that for now. Going on to Scott Games site teasers, most of the FNAF 2 ones just showcase new stuff, not necessarily lore. But notably, something borrowed, something new could bolster the idea that some of the parts of the old animatronics were used to help make the toy animatronics. So pin there. And also, this curtain seems to imply that there's a Pirate's Cove in the FNAF 2 location, but we never get to see it in game. So maybe there's a pink Pirate's Cove? We'll put a pin in there. As for the animatronics in the game, we see Withered Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, and then we see Toy Bonnie, Chica, and Freddy, the marionette, Mangle, and Balloon Boy. Occasionally, very rarely, you can see a Shadow Freddy on the monitors or a Shadow Bonnie in your room. Pins. That's all the lore I can think to collect in here, so let's move on to FNAF 3. As we've done, we'll start with the written lore, of which we only get 2 examples in newspaper clippings at the beginning and end of the game. Coming Soon just establishes that Fazbear Frights, the horror attraction, is a haunted house attraction in a theme park based around the stories surrounding the Fazbear franchise. So, pin, but at the end of the game, you get It Burns. Fazbear Frights burns to the ground. A new local attraction based on an ancient pizzeria chain burned down overnight. Authorities have not ruled out foul play, but at the moment it seems to have been caused by faulty wiring. Very little was found at the scene. The few items that were salvaged will be sold at public auction. So this attraction burnt down and whatever was salvageable was sold in an auction. Pin. On the phone conversations, this time they're given through the perspective of 2 people. Phone Dude, the guy who owns the attraction, and pre-recorded messages from what sounds like our old phone guy from FNAF 1 and 2. There's a lot of audio here, but I'll go through some key points. Springtrap was located in a boarded up room at a Fazbear location. The tapes that teach us how to use Springlock suits are recorded for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. There were 2 suits designed to be Springlock suits, and while in animatronic mode, they're programmed to seek out the noise of children. Every restaurant always has a safe room that is not on the animatronic programming or in the security detail, effectively, digitally, completely hidden. An accident occurred at a sister location of multiple simultaneous Springlock failures. The company deemed the suits temporarily unsafe, so the classic suits are being retired in an appropriate location until they're fixed. In the meantime, a temporary costume was provided, but due to short notice, it isn't seen as relevant or appropriate for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Management put out a reminder that 1, customers should never be taken into a safe room, and that they noticed the Spring Bonnie suit had been used and reminded people that they are unsafe. And then, due to budget restrictions, all safe rooms are to be sealed up with everything that is inside to be left in there and effectively forgotten. There's a lot of lore here, but one of the things that immediately confuses me is it seems like the back rooms were sealed up a long time ago, but Springtrap is in them when they're sealed. I'm not sure. We'll go more into that when we're piecing together the timeline, but for now, here are the pins that we can synthesize out of those details. Springlock suits were being used at least a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and a sister location at the same time. But after an accident at that sister location, they were decommissioned and put in a safe room. Every Fazbear restaurant has a safe room that is effectively invisible to the animatronics and security system, but one day all of them were sealed up at the same time with everything left inside them. Someone was taking customers into the back room and using the yellow suit. Some irrelevant costume was given to customers to use after the spring locks were locked away. Yes, we learn about spring locks here, but we're not going into Springtrap yet. We will get to him in a second. This second, in the minigames and cutscenes section. And this is where even more huge amounts of lore appear. There are two sets of minigames you see in FNAF 3. There are the ones you see every night, and then there's the ones that you only see when doing secret things in the environment. The in-between night minigames take place in a location that looks very similar to FNAF 1, especially the same in layout. Each one follows a different FNAF 1 animatronic being led to a back room they can't access by Shadow Freddy. Once they get there and then get confused trying to leave, a purple guy comes out of that room and decommissions them, pretty much breaks them into pieces, and the minigame ends. So big old pin there. There is one more notable event in these cutscenes. If you've done everything in the secret minigames, which we'll get to, the fifth one changes a bit. Now you're a spirit wandering through, you go into the back room and you meet several other spirits there, and the purple guy freaking out that he's surrounded by spirits. You chase him around a bit and then he goes into what looks like the old Spring Bonnie suit, but probably due to the moisture that's dripping on it, the springs contract, killing him instantly, and then the spirits presumably move on? They disappear. Yep, that is almost 100% certainly Springtrap. So we can synthesize this entire cutscenes to a purple guy broke down the animatronics in a location that looks like the FNAF 1 area after it has been closed down, no boarded door, and then gets cornered in a back room, puts on a springlock suit, and dies in there. As for the second set of minigames, they can be accessed by doing secret things in the environment with the clues given to us in the in-between night minigames. If done, we see different animatronics from the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, specifically Balloon Boy, Mangle, and Toy Chica. They then travel through different games based around them: Balloon Boy's Adventure, Mangle's Quest, and Chica's Party. If you sufficiently get out of bounds and break them, you then either retrieve a piece of cake or give cake to a crying child. If all of these are done correctly, eventually you get access to Stage 01. This one is much less of a game and isn't even titled as one. In it, we see what looks like a yellow Freddy and a yellow Bonnie performing on a stage for some children. If you escape the stage and do some shenanigans, you give out yet another piece of cake. The strangest one is next. RWQFSFASXC, where you're a purple glitched out Bonnie traveling through all the other minigames until eventually giving cake one last time. Finally, if all of these minigames are completed and you click this poster, you go to the Happiest Day minigame, where you are a small child with a puppet mask and eventually go to a side of the room with 4 children with a Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy mask, put a cake on the table, and the crying child stops crying, puts on a golden Freddy mask, or a lighter color, it's black and white, it's hard to tell. Then all the children disappear, their masks fall down, and their balloons fade up into the ceiling. Big old pin. Also, one last pin. If you do this correctly, at the very end, you see this screen with all the masks with their lights out. I don't think that's the canon ending. But regardless, there is an ending here where all the lights go out, possibly symbolizing the spirits have moved on. Pin. Still with me? I know, it's a lot, but let's move on to FNAF 4. First off, written lore. And, there isn't any. As far as I can find, there is no written lore in this game, nor is there any audio transcripts. What we do get in lore in the form of this game is the gameplay, the Scott Games teasers, and especially the minigames. So let's start with gameplay. So throughout the nights, the area around your bedroom somewhat changes. New items appear, all of which imply the location of a hospital. We see some medication, an IV bag, flowers, etc. So someone went to the hospital. Pin. And second, we see Nightmare Fredbear. Now, this is the first time we've seen anyone by the name of Fredbear since the mention of Fredbear's Family Diner in FNAF 2. Clearly, this Nightmare version is different, but it is worth noting that Fredbear is yellow. Also, whoever the protagonist of FNAF 4 is, has seen Fredbear. Pin. Now, let's do some Scott Games teasers before we get into the real meat of the lore of FNAF 4. We get various pictures of the Nightmare animatronics with the text, "Was it me? Was it me? Or me?" And then this big guy with the text, "Or was it me?" Probably, it's obscured, but that's most likely what it says. We also get this purple hat and a bow tie in the spotlight, the text, "The final chapter," and the text, "The end, thanks for playing." So nothing super pinnable here, but possibly the Nightmare animatronics did something, pin, and this was intended to be the final chapter of the game series, pin. Okay, now we're talking about the big boy lore of these games, the minigames. Now there's a lot of information in these, but I'm just going to go through some key details and we'll synthesize them into some pins as we go. There's a crying child who has an older brother and seemingly a sister we never meet. His brother constantly bullies him for his fear of the Fazbear animatronics. he doesn't seem to fear the actual characters, as he has plushes in his room that he refers to as his friends. But according to the Fredbears that are strewn throughout the area, he saw something which made him not trust the animatronics. Eventually, due to a prank pulled by his older brother and his older brother's friends, he's put in the mouth of a Fredbear animatronic, is clamped down on, and dies, presumably. Pin. The same voice that came from Fredbear talks to him while he's crying in the void. It promises to put him back together again and assures him that they're still his friends. Pin. The TV screen seems to imply that this game takes place in 1983, but that could just be the time the show aired. Regardless, Pin. This restaurant only seems to have a Fredbear and Yellow Bonnie suit, pointing to the fact that this could be the Fredbear's family diner we've heard about. But for now, Pin. These yellow suits are definitely seeming to be Springlock suits, as we see them worn and not worn throughout the cutscenes. Pin. I think that covers most of the lore for this game as well. So quick recap on some major finds we've plucked so far. Like I mentioned last week, William goes to prison. Or someone else does. Maybe it was Henry, that's why he wasn't there in the narrative so long, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Somebody went to prison. Also, notably, there were some out-of-place costumes used immediately after the Springlock failures. And notably for me specifically, Springlock suits were used at multiple Fazbear locations at the same time. For anyone who doesn't know, until I'm proving wrong, I'm theorizing about the timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's under the assumption that there's two distinct timelines. Essentially, and very briefly, FNAF Help Wanted presents us with an issue. The idea that there were a series of games made by an indie developer paid for by Fazbear Entertainment to cover up the history of the Fazbear franchise. Does this mean that every game before Help Wanted is suddenly not canon? I don't think so. It does present us with a quandary though. How much of those games can we trust? And how much of those games were the indie games made by the dev? We know from the tapes that a majority of the plot of those games is true to what happened in real life, but there's now unreliability throughout them. So what does this mean? Besides the fact that now Steelwell and Scott can just retcon things when they need to in order to make a new plot. More importantly for today's theory, it means that those games have their own separate and succinct timeline. So if we can figure out the timeline of those older games, we'll solve one of two things. Either we'll solve the entire real timeline of FNAF up until Ultimate Custom Night, or we'll solve exactly what Fazbear Entertainment was trying to tell the public happened in the new timeline. So, absolute worst case scenario, we're still solving something important. Where do we begin? By gathering our ingredients, of course. We need to dredge up every single bit of lore we can possible from these games. That would be FNAF 1, 2, 3, 4, World, Sister Location, Pizzeria Simulator, and Ultimate Custom Night. 8 games in total, as those are the ones that I found are probably made by the game dev in-universe. I know the books only say 1 through 3 and part of 4, but looking at what is referenced in Help Wanted and Security Breach, it seems likely that the other ones are actually in-game games as well. Once we have all of the lore, we can piece it together Pepe Sylvia style and try to make our own timeline. Honestly, we'll form the ultimate pre-Help Wanted FNAF timeline. Today's day 2 of our journey, and we'll be going over the lore from FNAF World onward. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. Let's start with FNAF World, as it was released before Sister Location. And like some of the games here, there isn't really written lore besides the dialogue that's in-game. Frankly, a lot of the categories we've been using don't really work for the upcoming game, so I might do away with them entirely. For FNAF World, I'll just summarize what happens in the game and we'll pin things that seem important as we go. The game opens on 2 dots that look like eyes. There's a voice behind them that lets us know that everything that happens out there has an effect in here. It tells us that something has gone wrong and now it can be seen here. That's why they're here. They won't let the same thing happen to us. They will put us back together. Then a hard cut and we're at the title screen. Yeah, big old pin right there. Whoever is orchestrating what we're about to see had something that happened to them, which is very similar to something that apparently happened to us. They're stuck in FNAF World now, but they don't want that to happen to us. It's also worth pointing out that this text mirrors the text at the end of FNAF 4. Moving on, we pick our difficulty, pick our party, we speak to Fredbear, and then they give us the plot of the game. Also note, doubling down now that this design is definitively Fredbear, which backs up our Nightmare Fredbear point from last video. But if you wait at this text long enough, eventually a glitched Fredbear will appear, with text that reads, "But you don't really believe that, do you? There's a task for you to complete. You have to leave breadcrumbs for him, to help him find his way." Yep, that is a pin. The plot of this game seems to be that we, the player, are helping him to do something. We are leading him somewhere. It kind of seems like we're helping him move on, but we're not sure yet. Going on to the next Fredbear location, the glitched Fredbear says, "Yes, the world beneath the surface world. This is a safe place, a sanctuary. The truth is, there is no safe place. You don't understand that. You were made for one thing. There's a task for you to complete. Before you follow this passage, go back. Find the clock. Definite pin here. This text makes me think that either the text at the beginning and this Fredbear are two separate characters, or they're talking to two separate people. Especially because in the beginning, it seems like they're taking care of somebody. But now, we were literally made. Did they make us? It's a little confusing. We then find the clock, interact with it, and do a very low-bit minigame where we push a balloon boy into a box. The rest of the game follows this formula. Play the game as normal, find a clock, do a weird minigame. But when you look at all the minigames together though, they start to make sense. We put Balloon Boy in a box, hit 4 buttons, put 4 cupcakes into boxes, set a code, and put a rabbit into a box. Pin. We're not sure why yet, but it's very clear that what we're doing in FNAF World mirrors the actions you have to take in FNAF 3 to allow the happiest day to happen. Once all the clocks have been set, we get access to a key, we grab that, we go to this portal, and we're met with this screen. The same as from the beginning, but now text that reads, "We are still your friends, do you believe that? All the pieces are in place for you. Now all you have to do is find them. Rest." And then the game ends. So yeah, pin there. Once again, this seems to be talking to someone else, letting them know that we as the player did our job and now they can move on, or something. Also worth noting that when you do this ending, you get a trophy that looks like a crying child, so put a pin there too. Before we move on to the other endings in DLC, I wanted to point out a few bits of dialogue that seem weird enough that warrant a pin. One of them being, you're being led through hoops, meanwhile the puppet master is laughing at you. Pin. It seems to imply that something nefarious is within FNAF World, or maybe even the creator of FNAF World itself. It's not clear, but it does feel important, and it's doubled and tripled down later in the game. You are being pulled on a string for his amusement. The one who pulls the strings is always watching. He allows you to progress. Don't be deceived by the one pulling the strings. This has to be important. It's repeated all the time. Alright. Other endings time. If you follow Fredbear's advice and play the game as normal on easy difficulty, you'll be met with this text box. Congratulations, you beat an imaginary monster in an imaginary game without taking any risks and without finding anything interesting on the easiest possible difficulty. So, great job. I'm still in control of you, and I say that you are finished here. You did away with a pretty powerful creation, but as for me, I remain out of your reach. It goes on to make fun of you a little bit more and then ends. Pin. Part of me thinks that this could be the aforementioned Puppet Master, or maybe just Scott Cawthon himself. We're not sure yet, but this feels important. If you do that same thing, but on the harder difficulty, the final boss you fight instead is Scott Cawthon himself. Once you defeat him, you get the text, "It was fun being the Puppet Master." Oh. Well, that's anticlimactic. Mystery solved? Okay, let's move on to a more interesting ending. Throughout the game, you go through glitches to get through different areas. If you go too many glitches deep, you encounter this lake with this man fishing. He calls himself Old Man Consequences, lets you know there's nothing else here, and the game ends. Pin. Because he does feel important, but like I said in my FNAF World video, he feels like an intentional part of FNAF World that just stops the player when they've gone too far. Especially because there's an even more secret ending you can get while here. If you force yourself into the lake, you go one glitch deeper. You fall for a while, and then you're met with this image. Some people think it's an angel, others think it's a figure holding their arms around 2 other figures in front of a TV. Whatever it is, it's not clear, but we will put a pin in it. Finally, and no, the Chipper and Sons boss is not lore, and I refuse to acknowledge it as such. In the wave of DLC for this game, they added a whole new section where you're playing minigames created by this guy at a desk, and you have to eventually figure out that the real secret boss is Chica's Magic Rainbow, and once you beat her and go back, you're met with this scene where the man at the desk apologizes, says he's made something stronger and out of his control named Baby. The lights go out, we hear this voice line.
The show will begin momentarily. Everyone, please stay in your seats.
And when the lights come back on, he's dead. Definitely a few pins here. How about this guy at the desk says that he makes Baby, and then Baby proceeds to kill him. Now, who is this Baby, you might be asking? Let's find out. But before we leave FNAF World, we typically pick a pin that says all the characters in the game, but there's too many in this game. So just pin that there's a lot of characters here, and we'll move on. Alright, FNAF World done. Now from one lore mess on to another, sister location. This one is also kind of weird, but most of the lore is actually just the plot of the game. So again, we'll just go through the plot and the lore that presents it and pin things as we go. And then we'll go back for any lore bits that don't normally appear. So let's get into it. Sister Location was actually the first game to feature an entire roster of voice actors, and they really show off with it. It's not just Scott on the phone anymore. They flex this immediately with the opening cutscene.
There are just certain design choices that were made for these robots that we don't fully understand. We were hoping that you could shed some light on those.
dance. She can sing. She's equipped with a built-in helium tank for inflating balloons right at her fingertips. She can take song requests. She can even dispense ice cream.
With all due respect, those aren't the design choices we were curious about, Mr. Afton.
Now, there's a few things of note here. First off, we get the name Mr. Afton. Pin there, that feels super important. But then we have to think about the scenario as a whole. He's being questioned. Is this the police that we mentioned earlier in FNAF 1? It's unclear. Regardless, pin that this Mr. Afton is being questioned about the robots he's made. As we begin the game, we're going deep underground and being talked to by Hand Unit, an AI robot that's set to help us throughout the nights. Notably, it has a sticky note on it that says the name Mike. Now we know its name is Hand Unit, and although it calls us Eggs Benedict, I doubt that's our actual name. So there's a chance that that's the protagonist's name, but for now, we'll put a pin that the name Mike is notable. We enter a vent, and while we're there, we hear that as Freddy Fazbear's Pizza shut down, these robots open to fill that void. So pin that this takes place after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza has been shut down. As we play, we learn that this game takes place within an underground bunker. Pin. And the main animatronics we see are Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, Ballora, and Circus Baby. Pin there as well. In between nights, we sit in this living room and watch a TV show called The Immortal and the Restless. Not sure if it will be important yet, but it feels weird enough to pin it. Moving on, later in the second night, the power goes out and Hand Unit shuts down. While Hand Unit is gone, Circus Baby begins to talk to us. She lets us know that we are in danger as long as the power is out and we should hide under the desk to keep ourselves safe. But notably, she mentions that someone who worked here before was the one who built this nook. So pin that we are not the first people to come down here. Also, while we're hiding from these little bitty babs, they say the lines, "Is it the same person?" and "She's watching us." That's sus, pin there. Once the bitty babs leave, Circus Baby warns us that Hand Unit is wrong about the next room and tells us what we actually have to do. We follow her advice, we survive, and then we get to the breaker room, and here's something really interesting. Sure, there's this minigame where you're avoiding Funtime Freddy while resetting the fuses, but get a good look at this breaker room map. At first, this makes sense. Everything with bold lines is where we currently are, and there's a gray dot that represents each animatronic. We've got one for Funtime Freddy, Ballora, Funtime Foxy, and Circus Baby. But notice there's 3 areas with faded lines and distinct maps with their own respective dots. Does it look familiar? It should, because this top right diagram is an exact replica of the layout from the gameplay of FNAF 4, along with 4 dots for those animatronics. Nightmare Bonnie, Nightmare Chica, Nightmare Freddy, and Nightmare Foxy. Even more so, on the top left side, there's an exact replica of the layout of the FNAF 4 cutscenes. We see the 4 rooms of the house, the street to get to the restaurant, and 2 gray dots for Fredbear and Spring Bonnie in that restaurant. This is crazy. And the bottom left is a little confusing, but it does look very similar to the hallway we play Fun with Plushtrap in. And that gray dot right at the end would be Plushtrap. There's 4 more dots in here, which is a little confusing. Now, this could be the Halloween update characters, but it's unclear. But we know at least for a fact that Sister Location and the FNAF 4 areas are intrinsically linked. So, big old pin right there. It also seems to be implying that FNAF 4 wasn't a dream, or at least it took place in some manner. It also seems to imply that the FNAF 4 house we see in-game and the house we see in the cutscenes are actually 2 separate locations, so put a pin in there as well. The rest of the night is mostly uneventful, and the beginning of the next one is as well, until you're presented with the choice to follow Hand Unit or go back to Circus Baby Gallery. If you go to the Circus Gallery, climb under the desk and close the door, and wait. Circus Baby tells you a story. It's kind of long, but it essentially boils down to she was only ever used once. When she was there was kids coming in and out of the room, she smelled great, there was glitter, it was a party, and then she was alone with one girl. And without her wanting to, she automatically did something that caused screaming, and then when the other kids came back, it was drowned out. Something happened, and it sounds like she maybe killed that girl and she's not sure why. We can actually get some more context for this to make a more succinct pin with something I haven't mentioned up until now. Before every night, we actually get one more bit of dialogue, a little girl talking to her father. In order they are,
"Daddy, why won't you let me play with her? Daddy, you let the other children go see her. Why won't you let me go? Daddy, just once let me go play with her. She's so pretty and shiny. Didn't you make her just for me? Daddy, she can make balloons. Have you seen her make balloons? Oh, Daddy, let me go to her." Daddy isn't watching.
and then at the end of night 5 we get,
Don't tell Daddy that I'm here. I wanted to watch your show too. I don't know why he won't let me come see you. You're wonderful. Where did the other children go?
So apparently, whoever made these robots, presumably a Mr. Afton from the first cutscene, had a daughter who he explicitly did not want to play with them. But she did anyway, and possibly she was the one that was killed by Circus Baby. But we're not making conclusions yet, so we'll just pin that a Mr. Afton had a daughter that really wanted to play with Circus Baby, and Circus Baby killed a girl when she was all alone. We can double down on this later, but we'll get there. Anyways, back to the game. At the end of the night, you're jump scared by Funtime Foxy and pass out. You wake up inside of a Springlock suit, and Circus Baby mentioned that she put you in there to protect you, and as long as you can hold still until 6 a.m., someone will come and find you. A few notable things during this sequence. One, Circus Baby mentions that this came from her old pizzeria. So, pin that it confirms that she came from a pizzeria, and that it had a Springlock suit. Second, during this scene, we're introduced to the Scooper. Pin there. We will get more information about it in a later game, but for now, just know that the Scooper exists. Also, there are other workers here, which feels kind of wild, so put a pin there as well. We barely survive the minigame, and then we go back for more on night 5. This night is a little packed, but essentially, Circus Baby lies to us to trick us to walk into the scooping room. Once in there, she shows that the voice talking to us is actually coming from Ennard, a collection of all of the endoskeletons of the Funtime animatronics, and they explain that they want to scoop us to use our skin as their exoskeleton so they can leave this bunker and live amongst normal people. We get scooped, it shows our silhouette with robotic eyes, and the game ends. Big ol' pin there. So that's the base game, but there is a secret ending. Once you beat the game proper, you unlock the ability to do a rare death minigame easily from the extras menu. The minigame itself is Circus Baby giving cupcakes to children. If you can give every child enough cupcakes to fill them, get the ice cream from the end and go all the way back to the beginning, you see this scene where Circus Baby puts out an ice cream, a little girl walks up by herself, and she scoops her. That sounds like exactly what we were talking about before, so that's pretty much confirmation. But this also unlocks a private room where we can do a few things. First, if you input a code on the wall, you unlock cameras showing the FNAF 4 house, doubling down on the fact that these games are connected. Tripling down even is the fact that this Fredbear plushie has a walkie-talkie. So put a pin there that someone in this room was possibly talking through the Fredbears using this walkie-talkie and looking through these cameras. The rest of this is the Ennard fight, but something notable is that Ennard can talk in the voice of that little girl, and one of the lines that he says is, "Isn't this why you came here? To be with her again?" Which is wild, so put a pin that the protagonist has some sort of a connection with this daughter. Now, moving on to some of the unlockable lore you get through doing different modes in the custom night. The first set of cutscenes you unlock is seeing the skin suit walk throughout its day and slowly get more and more decayed until eventually the body around it fully decays and it has to eject itself into the sewers. Put a pin there that their plan eventually doesn't work. But we do see after Circus Baby says, "You won't die" several times, the skin suit resurrects itself and gets the same glowing eyes that the FNAF 1 animatronics had when they showed possession. So put a pin that it seems like this protagonist just possessed himself, which is crazy. The other unlockable cutscene is actually a monologue that gives us a lot of lore. So I'm going to play the whole monologue, slightly sped up and with the pauses cut out so you can get the whole chunk, and we'll talk about pins after.
Father, it's me, Michael. I did it. I found it. It was right where you said it would be. They were all there. They didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you. And I found her. I put her back together, just like you asked me to. She's free now. Something is wrong with me. I should be dead, but I'm not. I've been living in shadows. There is only one thing left for me to do now. I'm going to come find you. I'm going to come find you.
Okay, so a few pins here. First, the protagonist of Sister Location's name is Michael, and he's talking to his father who told him to come down here and put her back together. He did, but he also didn't. And then he died, but he also didn't. So he then swears that he's going to come and find him. Pin. And finally, it's heavily implied through this cutscene that Springtrap is actually the father, as we see him rise out of the ashes of the Fazbear Frights attraction. Pin there. We can also start making conclusions about who is who, but we'll save that for the third video of the series. For now, let's move on to Scott Games teasers. As far as pictures themselves, it's mostly just cool images. Granted, we see Ennard saying there's a piece of me in every body, but we already know that. The real kicker for lore is hidden in two locations on this site. The first is the image cancelled due to leaks. If you braid it up, it it shows you a newspaper article where it shows that Circus Baby Pizza Worlds was closed on its first day due to gas leaks. So we can assume that this is actually when the incident occurred with Circus Baby and Mr. Afton's daughter. Pin there. But also, there's some source code teasers that shows us a schedule of renting out the different animatronics, and something that teases about a Chica's Pizza World, which is completely new information, so pins for those. That's a long one. Mainly because it's hard to go through because all the lore is just the plot. I can't just summarize it. Luckily, the next game, Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator, while just as lore heavy, the lore isn't intrinsically linked to the gameplay, so we can go a little bit more piecemeal as we go through it. And trust me, there's plenty of lore here. We just don't have to go minute by minute of the game. In this game, we the player are making our very own Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and the game can kind of be split into thirds. The first is the night shift, where we're building the pizzeria, testing out arcade machines, and buying things. The second third is then the day shift, where during the day in operations, we go back and we buy things and repair things to make the restaurant function in this very cramped metal office with no doors and a blaring air conditioning system. And then we get to the salvage minigames, where the player can decide if they want to salvage or scrap the animatronics that are found waiting outside of the pizzeria we're building. These 4 animatronics are all important in their own right, and they will all get their own pins. So let's just go through the characters of this game one at a time. First, Molten Freddy. He seems to be an amalgamation of wires, endoskeleton, and computer bits, with a melted Funtime Freddy mask on top. It speaks in this manic, glitched out voice that sounds like multiple people speaking at once. It also has 2 lines worth noting: "One big happy family" and "Together again." So pin that Molten Freddy sounds like multiple people, and they seem to have some sort of familial connection to either the other animatronics here or the player. Next, Scrap Trap. Immediately, he looks like a worse for wear and beat up Springtrap, also a worse designed Springtrap. And his voice sounds like a gravelly version of that Mr. Afton we hear in the Sister Location cutscene. He also mentions familiarity. In one of his voice lines, "You may not recognize me at first, but I assure you, it's still me. And I always come back." And most notably, and incredibly important, look at the credits. We have Molten Freddy, Scrap Baby, who we'll get into, Tutorial Unit, who we've seen, Cassette Man, who we'll get into, and lo and behold, William Afton. So 1, that has to be Scrap Trap, linking him to Mr. Afton, and 2, we now know Mr. Afton's first name, William. The same William Afton of Afton Robotics. And before I go off on the tangent of connecting things that I so desperately want to, we will just pin that Scrap Trap is Springtrap, who is William Afton, who is the creator of the Fun Times and the father of that one girl. Now, on to Scrap Baby. By name and design, she seems to be a worse-for-wear version of Circus Baby, which is a bit confusing because of Ennard's existence, but whatever. Judging by her voice lines, she also seems to think that this whole operation was actually William's doing and she's trying to help him. She's wrong, but it's worth noting, so put a pin there. Also add on the pin that her name is or was Elizabeth, according to Cassette Man, who we'll get to. Finally, the last one and most strange one, Lefty. At first, we don't get much of a read on him. Frankly, he seems brand new compared to all this trashed garbage. And he only shushes us. But looking at the blueprints of the game and this image in the back alley, we start to get a picture that Lefty was built to contain the puppet. So put a pin that Lefty is an animatronic built by the Cassette Man to capture the puppet, especially according to its name, Lure, Encapsulate, Fuse, Transport, Extract. Speaking of him, we've danced around him enough, the man of the hour, Cassette Man. He's the voice guiding us through every salvage minigame, and he gives us 2 lore dumps in the form of monologues at the end of 2 different endings. The tape is labeled HRY223. Now, this could imply that his name is Harry or Henry, and we do get confirmation from the books and from an interview, but that's not in the games, and we're trying to only use game information here, so put that aside, don't use it. For now, all we know is his name is Cassette Man, okay? He gives us a lot of lore, but I'm just going to try to bullet point it into pins as I sift through his monologues. The location of FNAF 6 is a metal maze made to look like a fake pizzeria, filled with scents and smells to attract animatronics that are haunted. He intended for the job taker, the player, to exit before he burns everything to the ground, but he notes that he assumes that the person who actually showed up for the job doesn't want to leave, and is in fact right where he wants to be, and burns along with him and all of the animatronics. Pin. His final plan is to collect every animatronic that's still out there and burn them to the ground, himself and anyone else involved in this whole fiasco, so they can all move on. Pin. Cassette Man confirms that his daughter was the one who was killed outside of a pizzeria by this purple guy, Pin. He also confirms that she then goes on to possess the puppet, who then shepherds the souls of the other victims of Purple Guy into the animatronics, Pin. He also confirms the one he hates the most out of these four and his old friend is none other than William Afton, judging by the visuals that go on during that time, Pin. In a second monologue received from the Insanity ending, Cassette Man then goes on to confirm a few things that we already had suspicions about. William Afton is the one who disassembled the animatronics in the Follow Me minigames, Pin. He also mentions that he did this again, which implies that he was the one who originally did the murders. This purple guy as well, Pin. Finally, he mentions a wound first inflicted on me, which implies two things. One, the final other purple guy is also William Afton, Pin. But also, this murder of Cassette Man's daughter seems to be the first of William's murders. Pin there. Before we move on, there's also some blueprints that give us a lot of lore as well. First off, there's a blueprint of the scooper, which tells us the actual function of this machine. It's a remnant injector, Pin. It also notes that if overheated, the effects of remnant may wear off entirely. What is remnant? We'll have to speculate in the third video. We then get the blueprints that tell us about Lefty that we already referenced. We get the blueprints of some machine that seems to be the thing that plays the audio in the vents of FNAF 6 and starts the fire. And finally, very important, we get a blueprint of what looks like Molten Freddy's face that has the security tags Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, and Ballora. It also mentions that this creature has the most remnant of any of the animatronics here. So, Pin that this seems to be the leftover of Ennard after Scrap Baby broke off of it. Also, remnant seems to be something about souls, but we'll get more into that in the third video. Alright, onto the minigames. Pretty much everything in this game that you can buy has a minigame, but there's a few secret ones that seem more important than the others. Candy Cadet, Fruity Maze, Midnight Motorist, and Security Puppet. If you talk to Candy Cadet enough, he'll eventually tell you a very morbid story, one of 3, but all of them have to do with taking 5 things, melting them into one thing, and having that one thing not work the way as intended. So, put a pin there. That seems to be a recurring theme. Fruity Maze, if beaten several times, eventually shows the player girl start crying as she collects dead dogs. Then we see, presumably William in the spring Bonnie suit, luring her in the back saying that he knows where her dog is and that the dog is okay. This just seems to be one of the ways that William Afton tricked kids into the safe room. Security Puppet kind of shows Take Cake to the Children in another light. It shows the Cassette Man's daughter being locked outside and eventually the puppet going after her. But by the time the puppet gets there, she's long dead and the rain shuts him down too. We can assume that this is where the possession took place, so put a pin right there. And for the most confusing one of all, Midnight Motorist. To summarize, this yellow guy comes home, the person on the couch watching TV says, leave him alone, he's had a hard day, but yellow guy doesn't listen. He bangs on the door, demands to be let in, and then decides to go around back and try to sneak in through the window. When he gets there, he notices that the window is broken and his kid snuck out. Oh, and he went to that place. This is weird, pin there. A few other notable things are in this cutscene though. 1, pin that there's animatronic footprints, put a pin that there is an unmarked grave in the woods, and put a pin that there's a building called Junior's that yellow guy is not allowed in. As far as Scott Games teasers go, there aren't many pictures that tell us a lot of things, but the source code of the Scott Games website and the FNAF World website actually had a conversation for a while. If broken down, the conversation reads, "You're overcrowding us, be quiet, you can't tell us what to do anymore, yes I can, you will do everything that I tell you to, we outnumber you, that doesn't matter dummy, we found a way to eject you, you would be lost without me, haha, say goodbye to our friend, I can put myself back together." So pin that this conversation happens. I'm pretty sure we know who this is, but I'm not going to speculate until video 3. Editing Riley here, this is like the day the video goes up, I totally forgot about the graves. The graves, you get that you get in one of the endings, you get these 6 graves with 4 visible names, 1 blocked and then 1 far in the distance. People will speculate what these mean, but we'll get into that in the third video. It's just super important to mention these. I totally forgot. Brain fart. That was a long one, and there's a lot in there. And I'm sure I missed something, but we'll get more into that later. For now, let's move on to the final game I'll be considering for the timeline, Ultimate Custom Night. And I think this one should be faster. For anyone who doesn't know, Ultimate Custom Night is Chaos Incarnate. Essentially, it's an homage to the entire franchise with 50 different characters that could be set from AI level 0 to 20. And you just play. There's no real plot to it, but there is lore. You can unlock some cutscenes that have lore in them, but I want to start with the strangest bit of lore first, go into the death quotes, and then we'll talk about the cutscene. In my opinion, the strangest piece of lore is the Old Man Consequences secret. If you only set Old Man Consequences as your enemy, go in game and catch a fish, you're taken to the FNAF World Lake. Old Man Consequences tells you to come sit with me a while, leave the demon to his demons, rest your own soul, there is nothing else. This is weird, put a pin in there for sure. Also, for the record, if you break into the lake this time, it just crashes the game. Also, the background audio, if slowed down and pitched up, reveals someone screaming what sounds like Mike, so put a pin there as well. Now onto the death quotes. There are a lot of them, and not all of them are important. Frankly, some of the ones I've picked out might not be important, but I went and picked out every death quote that could have lore in it, and we'll just pin each one.
I am remade, but not by you, by the one you should not have killed. I am given flesh to be your tormentor.
This time, there is more than an illusion to fear. We know who our friends are, and you are not one of them.
I am your wickedness, made of flesh. The shadow fears me.
Shh. I've been looking for you, and now I will never let you go.
What is this new prison? Is it me trapped, or is it you? Perhaps it's us both.
I was the first. I have seen everything. I have seen him, the one you shouldn't have killed.
Greetings from the fire, and from the one you should not have killed.
He's here and always watching, the one you shouldn't have killed.
The others are like animals, but I am very aware.
Also note, the voice here sounds like it could be that cassette man's daughter, just pointing it out there.
I am the fearful reflection of what you have created.
Admit it, you wanted to let me in. These are strange circumstances that have brought us together.
A song was requested of me, and now I sing it.
There's a lot here, pins for all of those of course. Again, I'm not going to go into what those mean yet, that's for video 3, but it is worth noting that this, the one you should not have killed, seems important. But there's a few that I wanted to separate from the others because they feel very specific and intentional. The mediocre melodies are a weird cast of characters, but a few of them have one specific voice line that is more menacing than their regular ones that has another voice behind it. Those would be,
We've only just begun. I will never let you leave. I will never let you rest.
This is how it feels, and you get to experience it over and over and over again, forever. I will never let you leave.
He tried to release you. He tried to release us. But I'm not gonna let that happen. I will hold you here. I will keep you here, no matter how many times they burn us.
that's honestly the majority of the lore of this game. But we do have some cutscenes to go over that you unlock from doing specific amounts of points beaten while playing the game. The first is a series of an anime-style rivalry of Freddy and Foxy. It's weird, but it could be important, so throw a pin in there. The second one is a series of cutscenes of Toy Chica, who seems to be kidnapping other animatronics, stealing something from them, and saying, "He'll be mine by the end of the day." This could mirror William Afton, it's hard to tell. Put a pin there. There are two more important bits of lore in Ultimate Custom Night that didn't really fit anywhere else. One, rarely in the vent right above your desk you can see this face. That's weird, put a pin there. And finally, if you somehow get as many points as possible in this game, you're rewarded with this cutscene of a glitching, twitching golden Freddy, slowly fading off into the distance. Put a pin there. Whew, that was a lot. But I think we're done with gathering lore, at least all the lore that I could find.
Five Nights at Freddy's timelines are complicated, and even though we're only 4 videos into making one, I think it is an appropriate time to place the original Scott Cawthon games into the timeline. And to be fair, the placement of the games themselves has never been the most complicated part about making a timeline. That goes more so to ordering the events before the games happen, because so much of the early timeline takes place before any FNAF game. Hopefully a future Fall Fest game or the upcoming Into the Pit game can fix that. We don't know, they're not out yet. So as is tradition, we're just going to be shooting in the dark for that section. But building off of what we figured out so far and using canon dates that we have in the franchise, what order makes the most sense for the original 8 games made by Scott Cawthon? Essentially every FNAF game before Help Wanted. And as a reminder, everything I am going to say in this video, except for the very next section, and I'll specify when I'm breaking that, is speculation. None of this is fact. It's speculation built off of evidence and reasoned logic, but don't go touting this around as a confirmed list or anything. As has been said by many creators in the space, it is just a theory. But Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves said theory. Like I mentioned, in this first section I wanted to go over confirmed and factual dates and events, some kind of anchor that we can ground ourselves to. So what do we have? Well, we do have 2 Fall Fest dates. Granted, the Fall Fest 83 banner is within Help Wanted, so its truth is up to suspect. However, I do think it's more safe to assume the 1970 Fall Fest poster we see in Help Wanted 2 is more factual. Regardless, both of them are noteworthy to mention here. It could be telling us a lot of things. After all, this could just be 2 Fall Fests, or it's more likely that this could be that Fall Fest ran from at the earliest 1970 to at least up until 1983. It's hard to tell. We know for a fact that the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was established in 1983. We do have the TV screen in the FNAF 4 minigame as supporting evidence, but the main evidence comes from the various coins in the franchise that all say Freddy Fazbear's Pizza established in 1983. We know for a fact that FNAF 2 takes place in 1987. After all, it's the date that's on the paycheck. The Missing Child incident doesn't have a confirmed date, but it is noteworthy that every book-based iteration of the Missing Child incident takes place in 1985. And since one of those books, Into the Pit from Fazbear Frights, is being made into a game, that date seems even more cemented in the game's continuity. We know that the Missing Child incident eventually shut down the original Freddy's within a year. Now, I say this mainly because FNAF 2 opens in 1987, and FNAF 2 is a reopening of Freddy's. Notably, this does go against something we get in that very same poster back in FNAF 1, because it mentions that that tragedy happened many years ago, which would imply that the Missing Child incident took place many years before the Freddy's closed down, not just 1 or 2. But I'm willing to omit this under the Help Wanted clause. The idea that Help Wanted is telling us that parts of the indie games made by the indie developer in-universe are inaccurate. I'm mainly willing to omit this because, in my opinion, we don't have a single Freddy's at this time that we know of that was open for many years. The original Freddy's was open for tops 2 to 3 years, Fredbear's wasn't a Freddy's, the FNAF 2 Freddy's was only open for a few months, and we don't know how long FNAF 1 Freddy's was open, but the posters are talking about a previous Freddy's location. So I'm willing to chalk this up to one of the indie game inaccuracies. We know that Follow Me, the minigames for FNAF 3, have to take place after FNAF 2, but before FNAF 3, because within that set of minigames, William Afton dies. Furthermore, it seems incredibly likely that it takes place after FNAF 1, judging from the layout of the building and the way the animatronics are disposed of. Even further, now this is pretty heavy speculation, but bear in mind, if Molten MCI is true and this timeline is using Molten MCI, Follow Me would also have to take place before Sister Location, because this seems to be the best time that William Afton was able to get remnant of the Missing Child incident. Speaking of Sister Location, that has to take place before FNAF 3, mainly because of that cutscene at the end of Custom Night where Michael says he's going to go after Springtrap, and presumably that's what he's doing in FNAF 3. FNAF 4 is a bit of a misnomer, but if they are Michael Afton's nightmares, they can pretty much take place anytime in the timeline. Now, I do think Michael's nightmares are based off of his experiences being put in the nightmare test chambers. Essentially, I think William Afton did what we see in the story Didophobia. So they're just recurring nightmares and can theoretically be placed anywhere on the timeline. I do think they start happening after FNAF 1 though, because of all the references to FNAF 1 in the FNAF 4 nightmares. The minigames of FNAF 4, however, are much more important to place and more specific. However, they are difficult. 1983 has been a date that's been thrown out because of the TV screen, but I think it's also likely that that's just when the show began to air. We know at least that these minigames take place while Fredbear's is still open. And finally, we know that the last game in the timeline materially is FNAF 6. I say materially because it's likely that Ultimate Custom Night takes place afterwards, and who knows where FNAF World takes place? I mean, I think I do, but we'll get to it. But as far as games that take place in the actual real world of the FNAF universe, FNAF 6 is the last one of the Scott Cawthon games. So, those are our constants. That is pretty much the main facts we'll be working with as little speculation as possible. So, what variables am I going to throw in to spice up the blend? Well, all of the speculation I'm going to be using is built upon the videos I've been making in the past month or so. There's a playlist right here actually that I made with all of those videos to catch up if you haven't seen them, which will be helpful because I'll be leaving out details and pieces of evidence from those videos that do help to bolster my arguments here, but in the interest of time, I'm only going to be going over the major points. months. So if I ever say something that seems completely out of left field, go watch the video I'm referring to and hopefully I'll explain it there. And if I don't, oops. But in the future, if you're watching a video like this and you don't want to have to worry about missing previous videos and having to recap, maybe consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. It's really helpful for me. First of all, like I mentioned, I believe that William Afton was doing nightmare hallucination experiments akin to what we see in the story Didophobia. Essentially, I believe he was putting someone through a bare-bones recreation of what we see in FNAF 4. However, he was pumping those chambers full of hallucinogenic gas so it seemed way more real, even though realistically it was probably closer to mannequins on sticks. I also think that after the bite that puts the crying child into a coma, William Afton puts Michael Afton into those testing chambers, partly so he has someone no one can check up on to experiment with, and as retribution for what happened to the crying child. I believe that Michael's time in these chambers are what forms the recurring nightmares we see in FNAF 4. So to be clear, I'm not saying being experimented on is what we're seeing in FNAF 4. I am saying what we're seeing in FNAF 4 are the PTSD nightmares Michael Afton has after being experimented on. It's very confusing there. I also believe that William taking Michael out of these chambers is a perfect manipulative method to get Michael to do whatever William wants him to. Essentially, William going like, hey, I saved you from these nightmares, now all you have to do is something for me. We know that William Afton manipulates Michael into going down into the sister location bunker. I also think that William manipulates Michael into working at FNAF 2 and FNAF 1 to try to get animatronic parts to do testing on Remnant. Essentially, I think William is manipulating Michael into being his guy on the inside. Moving on from Michael and William, I believe the original animatronics we see in the series were based off of felt suit characters from Fall Fest. In fact, I believe that Henry's main job when joining the company was converting these felt suit characters from Fall Fest into animatronics, and he got better each time. First was Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, then the original Freddy's cast, and by then he was so experienced, he made the Circus Baby Pizza World animatronics. However, I don't think Henry is the one who made them capable of child kidnapping. Rather, I think that was William's modifications to them after they were made, or rather his murderfications. And I know that's a big claim, but trust me, I've got a good feeling on it. You can go check out this video. Finally, in the timeline I've been cooking so far, I do believe that Elizabeth Afton was the first major death in the franchise. Then the crying child, then Charlotte Emily, and then the missing child incident. And I know Elizabeth being first is a little wacky, but I've got a good feeling about it. And if you want to know more details why, again, that specific video is right here. Alright, so with the constants we've established for the series, and the speculation that we've peppered into the mix, what kind of theory starts to rise when we put it in the oven? What kind of timeline are we baking here? Well, let's go over it, but again, focusing on the placement of these Scott Cawthon games, which admittedly will be a bit of an issue, because like I mentioned, there's a lot of ground to cover before you get any actual FNAF games. There are more events in the early timeline, and more events in the timeline I'm going to be covering, that I'm going to be brushing over for the purpose of this video, because right now I want to directly focus on correlating the games to placements in the timeline. Otherwise, this would be like an hour long, and I'm gonna save the long one for when I'm not ridden with allergies and we make the actual damn timeline. As far as I can see it, the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline begins with Fall Fest. I'm not exactly sure what happened here, because we have literally no direct information on this thing, but it seems like some traumatic event happened with fire. Maybe it was due to an animatronic setting up an early hatred towards Henry, or maybe it was something else entirely. We frankly have no information on this event, besides the dates 1970, 1983, and that several times Fall Fest is associated with fire. It is my speculation, however, Fall Fest was mainly manned originally by felt suit characters, most likely made by William Afton. Those characters were slowly being converted into animatronics by Henry Emily, and he was getting better every time. Eventually, they opened Fredbear's Family Diner with two of the fan favorite characters, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. That restaurant did well, and it inspired them to do more. After Fredbear's, they made Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, with even more characters. And they were then on slate to make a new restaurant, Circus Baby's Pizza World, with even more characters from Fall Fest. Before the launch, William Afton had some modifications he made to the Circus Baby Pizza World animatronics. And frankly, here's my biggest issue with this timeline. I have no idea why William would want to convert the sister location animatronics to be child kidnapping professionals. Maybe something happened at Fall Fest, maybe it's related to the fire, hell, for all we know, maybe Sammy Emily really is in the games and he kicked William in the shins or something. I'm gonna be brutally honest here, don't know. And I think the lack of motivation here, possibly the biggest weakness of this timeline. Best I can say for now is that something happened at Fall Fest to inspire William to do this, and hopefully some future game can enlighten us if that's true. But after William converts the sister location animatronics to be murderous, we know how the launch of Circus Baby's Pizza World went. Just before it opens, Elizabeth is able to sneak off with Circus Baby and get alone, to which Circus Baby's Funtime programming takes over, and she scoops Elizabeth inside of her, killing her. From another room, right as it's happening, Elizabeth's younger brother, the crying child, sneaks in and sees this go down. And after that, although the crying child still loves the characters his father creates, he's terrified of these animatronics. Circus Baby's Pizza World is cancelled, and the animatronics are shelved into the bunker underneath William Afton's house. Henry is confused as to what happened, possibly even blaming himself if he isn't aware of what William did. All he knows is that something went wrong. It's after this point that I do think the mini-games from FNAF 4 begin to happen. William Afton dives deeper into his studies and begins experimenting on fear and animatronics. After Elizabeth died to, frankly, his own negligence, he makes sure to watch his kids like a hawk, installing Fredbear plushie-looking cameras all over their house and surrounding neighborhood. He also makes sure to tell Michael Afton, his oldest son, to watch after his younger brother. Unfortunately for everyone involved, something that's going to become a recurring theme in this timeline, Michael Afton can't do anything right. In this instance, the constant bullying from Michael Afton to the crying child eventually leads to a head, where him and his friends prank the crying child by picking him up and hoisting his head into the mouth of the Fredbear animatronic while it's active, and when its jaw closes to talk, it crushes the crying child's head, putting him into a coma, literally doing the opposite of what Michael was told to do. After this, William takes an extreme step. He had already finished the testing chambers for his fear experiments, but instead of some random child, he uses Michael. After all, since it's his son, it would be less likely someone would try to find him, and it's sort of a sick retribution for killing the crying child. Michael is put into an endless nightmare loop of horrifying versions of the Freddy's characters in admittedly stripped down mannequin form, but those chambers are filled with hallucinogenic gas, making it feel all too real. Again, note, I do not think this is the FNAF 4 gameplay. We'll get there when we get there. The crying child eventually dies from a coma and is buried in the woods. To try to keep Freddy's open and keep public faith, Henry installs the security puppet, an animatronic that will watch the kids at the restaurant and ensure no more children get too close to the animatronic. William, possibly out of spite or even possibly out of revenge, seeing that the two animatronics that killed his children were made by Henry Emily, goes to get revenge for himself. But as William arrives at the Freddy's location, he sees Charlotte Emily locked outside. And finally, an opportunity presents itself. William gets even with Henry and kills Charlotte Emily, leaving her body on the street. We learn in the story Alone Together that a spirit cannot gain their memories until their body is found, even if by themselves. Luckily for Charlie, her body is left on the street in public, so her body is found and her memories, presumably, are with her. This is what allows Charlotte to remain at the restaurant and possess the puppet. Henry seemingly retreats into grief, leaving William the perfect opportunity to continue killing, possibly as revenge to the children who bullied the crying child, or possibly to begin doing some other kind of experiment. So he commits the missing child incident, and since the bodies of those children are stuffed into the animatronic suits never to be found, the children who die aren't even sure they're dead, being wandering spirits that remain at the Freddy's location. It's only until Charlotte sees them and leads them to find their bodies that they're able to regain their memories and possess those animatronics. After the missing child incident, the original Freddy's location closes. Quick check-in. Have you noticed something? Besides a minigame from FNAF 4, we are like 1,000 words into the timeline and still not a single Five Nights at Freddy's game has happened. This is what I'm talking about. The beginning structure of a FNAF timeline is so vague, yet so important, and we have no direct evidence to tell us anything that happens here. It is all speculation based off a minigame or a detail from the books. I can only hope that Into the Pit will remedy this, or possibly we'll get a Fall Fest game from Steelwool sometime in the future. But until then, this is the best we can do. Luckily, our first FNAF game of the timeline is happening very soon. Sometime after Freddy's closes in 1987, an entrepreneur tries to reinvigorate the Fazbear brand, buying the rights for it and opening staff for a new location. Henry hears the news and fears that William is the one who did all of those horrible acts. So, to make sure that the children at this new location would be safe, he joins on as an engineer and creates the toy animatronics. But Henry's efforts once again prove unhelpful, because William still manages to sneak a job at the new location, and while there commits 5 more murders of children, this time just leaving their bodies all over the restaurant. However, while he's doing this, he noticed that some of the animatronics are acting strangely, almost aggressive towards him, almost as if possessed. It's during this time that FNAF 2 takes place. But before he can go back and observe the animatronics more closely, the whole restaurant goes on lockdown and previous employees are not allowed in. William would need someone else to do this for him, and he just so happened to have an eldest son perfect for manipulation. Alright, bye Mark. Honestly, with how bad my allergies are today, probably for the best. William goes back to the Nightmare Chamber bunker and quote-unquote saves Michael from them. To explain this manipulation, imagine it from Michael's perspective. He's stuck in this never-ending nightmare torture cycle, and suddenly they stop, and his father walks in, saying, "Son, I finally figured out how to save you from this. You just need to do one thing for me. And if you do it, not only will you be saved from this, but your little brother might be able to come back to life, and we can fix your mistake." So, of course, he would say yes. And admittedly, all Michael had to do was get a job at the FNAF 2 location and get some pieces from the animatronics so William could study them. But unfortunately for William, Michael can't do anything right. And although he got the job, he gets caught tampering with the animatronics on literally his first day, and is promptly fired. After that resounding failure, William just sends Michael back into the nightmare chambers. After the FNAF 2 location closes, as far as I'm aware, Henry just kind of fucks off. Everything he's tried has failed so far, so I'm sure he's filled with regret and remorse and just becomes an isolated shell of a man. But during that time, another entrepreneur tries to reinvigorate the Freddy's brand. They buy up the company, refurbish the animatronics, and just put out the most low-budget restaurant they can. And upon hearing the news that a new Freddy's is coming to town, William doesn't waste any time. He does the same song and dance again, saving Michael from the nightmares in the promise that he just needs to get some animatronic parts from these Freddy's characters. But William still hasn't learned. Michael can't do anything right. Five Nights at Freddy's 1 happens here, and by the end of the week, Michael is fired once again for tampering with the animatronics. Furthermore, at this point after FNAF 1, Michael's recurring real PTSD nightmares start to resemble what we see in the FNAF 4 gameplay. Michael Afton, however, finally catches a break, and William doesn't immediately send him back to the nightmare bunker. Yet anyway, William needs to go and do it himself, since clearly he's the only one that can. So he leaves specific instructions for Michael to follow in the case that he doesn't return. And the Follow Me minigames begin. Each night, William sneaks off to the now closed Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and disassembles one of the animatronics. Then he brings them back to the sister location bunker, melts it down into Remnant, and injects it into a Funtime animatronic. But after 4 nights of this, he's noticed that although these animatronics are starting to seem to come to life, they're unruly and hard to control. He would need the thing he's always used, his Spring Bonnie suit, something to remind them who's in charge. But on that 5th night, he's cornered by the spirits of his past, and in an attempt to save himself, he puts on the Spring Bonnie suit, getting spring-locked and dying in the process. After enough time passes, Michael deems William isn't coming back, and follows the instructions given to him. Then sister location happens pretty much exactly the way we see it, and unfortunately for everyone involved, Michael can't do anything right, because he does, admittedly, help the sister location animatronics to be free. But in doing so, they form into Ennard, scoop out all of his insides, wear his skin to exit, leave his skin when it begins rotting, and then he possesses himself. So, Ennard is free, and in a way, Michael Afton can't even die correctly. However, it's at that moment that Michael finally really knows what his father William is actually doing. So he vows to find William Afton and presumably kill him. This search goes on for decades without a hit until eventually Fazbear Frights is opened, a horror attraction based off of what happened at Freddy's. Michael, hopeful he'll find something to lead him towards William, gets a job there as the pretend night guard. Well, the real night guard that if the business is bad enough, he'll have to pretend to be a night guard. FNAF 3 is confusing conceptually. FNAF 3 happens, and William Afton is eventually shipped to this location. Michael just wanted like a lead, but instead it finds his entire father still alive somehow. So he burns the whole place to the ground in the hopes that it'll finally kill William Afton. Of course it doesn't, but Henry hears about the FNAF 3 fire on the news, and goes digging into William Afton, afraid that he might still be out there, might still be committing these horrible crimes. crimes. In his search, Henry finds the sister location bunker and the schematics within it, getting the full picture on the depravity of what William has done. And now that he knows this, Henry Emily hatches the Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator, a plan to lure every player still in this game to one location and finally end it all. And it works. William Afton, Elizabeth Afton, Charlotte Emily, and the Missing Child Incident kids in their current forms show up at the location. And to his surprise, Michael Afton, William's oldest son, shows up as well, looking worse for wear and having a sense that he also wants this to end. Finally, they flip the switch and they all burn to the ground. But after that fire, two spirits are still doing work. Charlotte is still holding on to the afterlife and trying to help any wayward souls that didn't fully burn away in the fire, and we see this in FNAF World. Cassidy, however, attached to William Afton, won't let him pass on so easily and torments him forever in his own purgatory in Ultimate Custom Night. And that, I think, is a pretty brief timeline of all of the Scott Cawthon FNAF games, mainly focusing on where the actual games take place. I left out a lot of details and a lot of motivations and frankly, a lot of characters, because I really wanted to just focus in on the actual game placements. So, TLDR, I think the correct order of the Scott Cawthon FNAF games in a chronological timeline is FNAF 2, FNAF 1, FNAF 4, Sister Location, FNAF 3, FNAF 6, FNAF World, and Ultimate Custom Night. And I'm talking about like the main gameplay of these games. The mini games are scattered throughout. But what do you think so far? Is there any evidence that could help the major flaw with this timeline? Or is there evidence that directly goes against something that I've said here? I'd love to know in the comments, because this timeline is still actively being shaped and molded and is subject to change if I think of something or someone tells me something better. Five Nights at Freddy's Special Delivery. The game with such a legacy that my speech-to-text that I use to write my scripts misheard me and thought I said Five Nights at Freddy's Special Deliver, which, side note, that is my new Sonic OC. But Special Delivery was an AR mobile game that was criticized for being a bit too pricey and impossible to play in public. And by a bit too pricey, I mean incredibly overpriced, and technically you could play it in public, but the only way to play Special Delivery is to hold your phone at eye level and spin around in circles. And if you see me doing this at a public park, the cops will be called on me and I will deserve it. But recently the developers cut the servers to the app after a year or two of not updating it. So it's officially the first FNAF game that is lost media. You can't play this game. Sure, technically you could say FNAF World before any updates is lost media, but you can still download and play that version of FNAF World. Outside of a fan game that's recreating the gameplay experience, and I hear is pretty good, I haven't played it yet, there's no official way to play Five Nights at Freddy's Special Delivery anymore. It just doesn't work, which is a shame for the lore of the app. When I first wrote this video, I was mostly planning to recap all the lore and talk about how good the jump scares in the game are, and that was gonna be it. It was kind of like a final farewell to the game. But when doing research for this video, I had to watch a Let's Play of the only scripted, fully done content of the app, Dark Circus, a DLC for the game. And when I tell you what I found blew my mind, I'm not exaggerating. I legitimately think this app was telling us the future of Five Nights at Freddy's for at least the next few games, and even some of the past. Enough teasing what I found. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. Despite the appearance of it, this app is chock full of lore. I know, a game with Darkwater Endo as a character probably shouldn't be taken with the utmost seriousness. But there's a good amount of lore in here that I guarantee you've already heard from other theorists in the space like FNAF. A good majority of this lore comes from emails that you can unlock by playing the game. They're not emails meant for the player, they're emails between employees of the company that made this service. Essentially, think of Help Wanted. In Help Wanted, we're playing a in-universe FNAF game made by an in-universe game developer. Same deal with Special Delivery. In fact, there's a lot of crossover. It's these emails where we learn about Vanessa and Lewis before security breach is even a thing. It's also where we learn how the glitch trap virus was consolidated, and so much more. I would cover all of the email lore here, but it's not really the point of today's video anymore. Besides, it's been covered in plenty other videos that are very competent in doing so. Just know that this game is where those emails are from. And a lot of the community, myself included, just kind of nodded my head and went, okay, that's the lore from Special Delivery, and moved on. But that's not all. There is so much more lore in this game. specifically in the Dark Circus. It's one thing that never really got touched on in the main zeitgeist of the community as far as I'm aware. It was a paid DLC that boasted an immersive escape room experience. And as cool as a concept as that is, nobody that I knew ever played or talked about it. Mainly because it was a $20 expansion to a free AR game that most people had already stopped playing. It was also like 30 minutes of content for $20. Apparently, while the app was on the way out in the past few months, they switched it over to be able to be bought with in-game currency, but I didn't go back and play it. It seemed like a cool concept, I just didn't really have the time or feel like I needed to, and I knew it existed, I just, I didn't play it when it first came out, so I'm like, yeah, why now? And man, do I regret not playing it. Not only because it does seem genuinely fun, but it is so goddamn hard to get footage of this DLC expansion, because essentially there's like one really good walkthrough of exactly what to do and they just do what they need to do and leave. And then there's Let's Players. There's not really good footage of like, here's this wall, top to bottom. Here's this wall, top to bottom. So it's hard to search these rooms. I've watched like 10 Let's Plays trying to get every angle I could out of this DLC. So let's go over the actual expansion and break it down. The Dark Circus opens with you in an escape room themed after Five Nights at Freddy's that seems to be in some kind of carnival. The walls are thin and wooden and the floor is made of straw. It's very like built up to be moved around a lot. If you've ever been to one of those farms that do like hay rides and haunted houses during the fall and then take them down, it's that kind of vibe where it's definitely a shoddy building, but it's not meant to stay. The main gameplay of this escape room is looking for these fuse box looking things on the wall. Each of them need different codes and the codes can be found in the environment. You're essentially trying to search through the environment to find the appropriate codes to use at the appropriate time. And then eventually as you're playing, when you unlock certain fuse box lock thingies, you have to do a boss fight against one of 3 animatronics. First, Ringmaster Foxy, then Ballora, and then Great Escape Golden Freddy. The first 2 are on stages that are initially inactive but slowly become more active as more puzzles are solved, and the third one, Great Escape Golden Freddy, is fully within a water tank. You cannot see it until the final encounter. And then once you solve all the lockboxes and do all 3 boss fights, the event ends. And again, it's really cool. Not worth $20, but really cool. And this all seems especially interesting now with the discussion of Fall Fest being so important. This attraction lines right up with a Fall Fest, a fall-time, straw-floored, thin-walled building that you have to do an escape room in. It's like a more involved haunted house. Casey, you're purring, but you're acting like you want to play, which means you're going to attack. And I don't want to be attacked, so if you attack, I am going to put you down. Be a good boy. I know you're kind of a bastard, but be a good boy. I don't know if y'all can see, he's wagging his tail in anticipation. He wants to smack. I'm not going to let you smack. And it's not that he's annoyed. Look at his ears. Listen to him purring. He's a baby who likes to play, but he's sharp. So I don't like to play with him, at least not with my hands. But this all begs the question, if it happened at a Fall Fest, which one? After all, the Fall Fests that we know for sure happened definitively were in 1970 and 1983. And it is a pretty safe assumption that it was a running annual festival from as far back as 1970 to at least 1983. We also know that in some way, Fazbear characters are tied to it. After all, Help Wanted 1, an in-universe FNAF game, features Fall Fest of 83. And there's posters in Help Wanted 2 associating Fall Fest with FNAF characters. So, did an escape room like this happen at an earlier Fall Fest? It seems likely, especially when you look at the poor fire safety of the place. All over this attraction are boxes marked explosives, boxes of fireworks, barrels of oil, flammable material, again, in a thin wooden walled building with a straw floor. This place is almost cartoonishly unsafe of a fire hazard, and many people, myself included, speculate that a tragic fire occurred at Fall Fest. After all, in the games, most of the times that Fall Fest is mentioned, a fire soon follows. Could this attraction be at the Fall Fest that caught on fire, and did this attraction start the fire? Well, as obvious as that seems, it might be too obvious. What I mean is that this all seems really intentional. This early in the timeline, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza isn't necessarily a scary place. With the evidence we have and the vibes we know, at this point in the timeline it would be a kid-friendly place. And sure, it's a Fall Fest, so some spookier elements are to be expected, but this place seems genuinely frightening. Intentionally so. I mean, look at Ballora, she acts like a spider, she's chained up, she crawls towards you, that's terrifying. Pair that up with the cartoonishly dangerous fire hazards all over the place, and it almost seems like it's a parody of what Fall Fest used to be, which lines up with how Fazbear is treating the history of the company. Think back to Help Wanted. We know for a fact that Fazbear hired an indie game developer to make games based off of what actually happened at Freddy's restaurants, specifically so that they themselves could release a VR game going, man, those are some crazy stories, right? Well, look, we'll enjoy the crazy stories with the rest of you, but just know they're crazy stories and we can move on after. This attraction would line right up with Fall Fest in the same exact way. It seems pretty likely that some kind of tragic fire happened at a Fazbear branded Fall Fest, and if Fazbear keeps trying to make light of the past so they can go back to their old ways, it would make sense if they're bringing back Fall Fest. And one of the opening attractions is an escape room where it's like, man, look at how creepy and fire unsafe we used to be. Pretty funny, right? So if that's what this is Fall Fest coming back? We've all been trying to figure out what Carnival is. Essentially, for those who don't know, obviously Steel Wool is still making future Five Nights at Freddy's games, and we're always going to try to figure out what the next one is going to be. Something that tipped a lot of people off in the recent Ruined DLC for Security Breach was this unused map with the note, quote, something cool that maybe foreshadows Carnival pending J-Top's thoughts. Add that to the Carnival-themed mascot suits in the Mimic Room. What I'm talking about, y'all see that? Add that to the Carnival themed suits in the Mimic's room, all the Circus stuff with the Brazil ending and Balloon World and Security Breach, Circus Baby being relevant again, not to mention the Balloon Circus stuff that we saw from Funko, all seems to be lining up like the next game is going to be something circus themed. I've been thinking that circus carnival type game is going to be Fall Fest, and if we're lucky, one that's early enough in the timeline to give us some answers that we've all been desperate for. Maybe even the Fall Fest that had the tragic fire. But there's a thought that never occurred to me. I was talking to someone about this, and frankly, I can't remember who. I don't remember if it was a mutual that I was DMing or a podcast guest or somebody on Twitter. I frankly can't remember. So I just want to put it out there. Not my original thoughts. If it was a podcast episode, let me know in the comments. If you're a mutual and you told me this, yell at me in a DM and I'll put it somewhere. But somebody pointed out to me that if the next game takes place in one of the early timeline Fall Fests, what would be so scary about it? All the scary stuff in Freddy's takes place because of what happens during the timeline. So if there's a game that takes place before any of that, what's there to be scared of? And I hadn't considered that, but this idea would remedy that issue. If the next game Steel Wool creates is Fall Fest, it could be that Fazbear is trying to bring Fall Fest back, and they're just making it overly scary to make fun of the weird stories that always got told about it. And if it is taking place further in the timeline, is Cassie going to be there? And if Cassie's going to be there, is she still going to be Cassie? After all throughout Ruin, Cassie's mind is being taken over by Glitchtrap. At least that's what it seems like. It seems like she's going to be the next Vanny. And all three endings end with her still being trapped in that basement. So it's not looking good for our girl Cassie. I think it'd be a really fun and interesting villain to have an evil Cassie being taken over by Glitchtrap. But I only hope that they utilize her more than they did Vanny, because they barely utilized Vanny. Originally, that's where the script ended. I would have talked more about the emails in the original script, but I was happy with it. But then I did a little more digging, and things got weird. So let's start with an easy one, and then we'll go down the rabbit hole. First up, really quick, and whether you believe it or not, I think this is easier to understand instead of what I'm going to go into after. It's interesting that with a Fall Fest circus kind of themed DLC, they have 3 animatronics, and only 2 of them have custom skins. We've got Ringmaster Foxy, which makes sense, Great Escape Golden Freddy, which also makes sense, and then it's just Ballora. I get it. On the face of it, sure, it's a dark circus. Ballora's already from Circus Baby's Pizza World. You don't need to theme Ballora into a circus. She already belongs to one. And I agree with you. Ballora does fit really well in a circus Fall Fest themed setting. I think that's great supporting evidence for my theory that the sister location animatronics were originally characters in Fall Fest. Just some food for thought and a primer. If that seemed too far-fetched for you, you might not like what I've got cooking up. This is going to be a stretch, and not necessarily a good stretch that makes you feel better, but it might even be a bad stretch that locks up your thighs and make you fall on the floor. Even Casey doesn't like it. My guy Mark does though. Full disclosure, this might lead nowhere, but it might give us some answers we've been desperate for. And it all starts with Great Escape Golden Freddy. Look at this model. It's crazy good, and by the by, I can only fully show off this model in a good way because of a fan render. There's, as far as I'm aware, no good screenshots on the internet in-game that show the full model of Great Escape Golden Freddy. This fan render is actually by Charlie Suntime. Anyways, at first glance, this seems incredibly normal. After all, escape acts and escape artists are incredibly common features at circuses and carnivals. This skin harkens back to the idea of Houdini tying himself up and hoisting himself upside down, or sometimes even submerging in water to escape. But it's really notable that they chose to have Golden Freddy in a tank of water. Golden Freddy is drowning. Drowning has an interesting connotation in Five Nights at Freddy's. The first one that comes to mind for me is the most recent example I can think of, the story from Tales from the Pizzaplex, Drowning. It's one of those stories that does feel mostly separate from the book continuity, as it doesn't really affect things outside of it. Essentially, it's about a girl who gets trapped in a VR water park experience, and some spooky ghost girl that looks like she's drowned keeps trying to pull her into the water. Eventually, she succumbs to it and drowns in-game and dies in the real world. It's a really good story and one of the more well-written ones. Honestly, one of my favorite Tales from the Pizzaplex stories. Really nails that sense of dread. But it became a lot more interesting when people were considering whether or not the drowned ghost girl is Cassidy, the vengeful spirit, the one many think is in Golden Freddy. Admittedly, there's not an amazing point of evidence that proves this, just a lot of circumstantial evidence that kind of fits the vibe. At some point, our main character says she used to play Save the Princess, which then somewhat loosely associates princesses with this story, and Cassidy is theorized to be the princess in Princess Quest. Her physical description kind of a little bit matches other physical descriptors we've seen in these games, especially if this girl from the logbook is supposed to be Cassidy, which I'm not fully sold on. The fact that the girl drowned at all, which we'll get into in FNAF World, and mainly the fact that there is a spirit of a girl in the digital space of the Pizzaplex. If that's not Cassidy, who else would it be? Because it doesn't feel like Charlie, because that's not really how Charlie acts. So some people thought, okay, the vengeful ghost girl in the mechanics of the Pizzaplex is the vengeful spirit. She's still stuck to William Afton, so she ended up here. And with that same thought of Cassidy being one of the main contenders for the spirit within Golden Freddy being locked up inside of a tank of water is incredibly noteworthy. Not to mention, in the story Drowning, our main character eventually ends up in a house that is implied to be where the girl grew up at, and eventually she finds the girl inside of the bathtub. So in a way, the story is implying that this girl might have drowned in a bathtub. And what do we find in the Dark Circus? This seems to be bathtub. Now pause. I know this could just be like a boat for like a Love Boats ride or straight go-kart that just looks weird. It could be a lot of things. There isn't great footage on this because there weren't any codes in it, but it does kind of look like a bathtub. But this isn't the only other reference to drowning in Five Nights at Freddy's. Both FNAF World and Ultimate Custom Night have the same Old Man Consequences area with a red lake. In both areas, you can glitch your character into the lake to get some kind of secret. I believe in Ultimate Custom Night it crashes, and in FNAF World you get this ending. Either way though, if you do it in Ultimate Custom Night, you still get the achievement in it for FNAF World. It's one of those things that weirdly connects FNAF World and Ultimate Custom Night. There's a few. But again, if the Vengeful Spirit is the one doing Ultimate Custom Night, and if Cassidy is the Vengeful Spirit, this is once again an instance where you're drowning Cassidy. So again, these themes of Cassidy, Golden Freddy, and drowning keep popping up. None of them entirely convincing, but all of them interesting. And I thought those were the only ones, but actually on a recent podcast episode with Oof Troop, they pointed out this.
Because a big mechanic in Ruin is like Cassie goes into like an AR world and can go through glitched objects to essentially teleport, which is how you move around in FNAF World.
No, that's a great point.
And she gets deeper and deeper and deeper down into the Pizzaplex until she gets to the red lake.
I never connected the fact that the lake in Ruin is red.
Yeah, it's a red lake, and it has dead trees surrounding it.
Huh. But that's not all. That got me thinking a lot about Ruin. And what's the first thing you see when booting up a copy of Ruin? The opening lobby where this statue of Freddy is toppled over. Mind you, this is a statue of Glamrock Freddy, but it is still a statue of Freddy that is golden. It seems like workers tried to pull it up out of the pit that it fell into, but they must have given up halfway. So one of the first set pieces you see in Ruin is a toppled over, broken Golden Freddy wrapped in chains. And what's the last thing you see in the Dark Circus DLC? A toppled over, broken Golden Freddy wrapped in chains. This blew me away. But there admittedly is a really important question that I am failing to answer. What the hell does this all mean? There's a possibility that it doesn't mean anything. This could just be a series of coincidences and I'm squinting too hard at it, and it's at best an Easter egg. But I feel like it has to mean something. The only thing I can think of right now that would make some modicum of sense to explain all of these plot threads is the reason Cassidy is the vengeful spirit is because instead of just killing her like William Afton did the other kids, he specifically drowned her. And a death that frightening and that painful is what made her so vengeful in the first place. But that doesn't feel right. Something doesn't add up there. Scott has always been very responsible when talking about like the victims in FNAF and never really delving into the details of what William did to them. It's always been very like, oh, he killed them, period. So to have an important plot point be the method of how he killed one feels off. Not only that, but if William Afton drowned Cassidy, where the hell did he do it? Does Freddy's just have a bathtub in the safe room? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. So that feels like a departure from the franchise. But I can't think of any other explanation for why there's all this drowning associated with Cassidy. So that's where I'm leaving the theory for today. Here is all my evidence and all my findings and all the information I could think of. What do you think? I desperately want to hear y'all's thoughts on this. The time is finally here. I've been making videos on videos of the full timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's and my process for making my own in-depth timeline. And like I mentioned at the start, I'm going to be using the bulletin board I made about more than a year ago when I tried to make a timeline without using any books, just the games up until Ultimate Custom Night. But because of what I just said, you realize this bulletin board is lacking in a lot of information. So why don't we make this bulletin board bigger? And now, let's add stuff to it. On today's video, we will be going over all the lore that I can pluck out from Help Wanted that I think is relevant for the timeline, and I'll be putting it on this board. I'll also be touching on Five Nights at Freddy's Special Delivery, the AR app, because after all, Help Wanted and Special Delivery kind of go hand in hand. Of course, we'll be adding Security Breach Ruin and Help Wanted 2 as well, but they'll get their own videos because I have a feeling this is going to take a while for these games. So for now, Slices, put on your aprons and let's do some lore scouting. And just one quick reminder, this bulletin board and its entire purpose is just to document factual evidence from the games with zero speculation. I think it's really important to ground yourself in what we know for a fact before we start speculating. So that's the purpose of this board. There's going to be things that we're all pretty 99% sure of, like the name Glitch Trap, that I won't be putting on this board for that very reason. Now, in case it's been a while since you've played Help Wanted, and to be fair, that game came out 5 years ago, almost to the day. Like, it's crazy how close this is coming out to the 5-year anniversary of Help Wanted. But I figured it's best to re-go over the story of the game and to refresh everybody so we're working on an even playing field. After all, back when we did the bulletin board for the Scott games, up until Sister Location, there wasn't really a story to go over, so we were able to do 2, 3, 4 games in one video because we just did the bullet points of lore. But Help Wanted onward, literally every single game has some semblance of a story. So we should go over them even if we don't directly put that story on the bulletin board. The story of Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted is very meta, actually. An in-universe Five Nights at Freddy's VR game is being made, and it just got sent to our company, which we are a video game tester at. And it's our job to make sure the game is playable and ready to be launched. But as we make our way through the video game, we find these glitchy cassette tapes that the previous game tester left in the files. As we play the game and collect them, we learn that these tapes were left to document what was going on behind the scenes of Fazbear and that previous company, and document what was going on within the game itself. After all, they warn us of something that the girl who recorded them calls the anomaly. And as we collect these tapes, that anomaly we're being warned about grows stronger, more clearly visible, and closer to us. As it comes into view, it appears to be a stitched together felt costume styled to look like a yellow Bonnie. And that's much of the game. You play these minigames and you collect tapes to then see this image more clearly. Playing through the games, we encounter 3 different endings. Well, kind of 4. The main basic ending you get if you beat every single minigame and every single hard mode version of those minigames, after which you unlock something called Pizza Party. It's a weird, confusing maze of a level where you're going through all these different set pieces, and eventually you get to the end, where your reward is the back room of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, or at least something that looks like it. The curtain moves and you're beckoned behind the curtain by the anomaly, and it's here that you can get one of 2 endings. The main ending here, and the only ending with this branch for quite some time, is you listen to the anomaly and go behind the curtain, and once you do, it fades to black, and it fades up, and the anomaly is dancing to the Freddy's game performing a song, and you realize you're looking from the perspective of Freddy Fazbear. The implication here being that you got stuffed into the Freddy Fazbear animatronic suit. However, when the Curse of Dreadbear DLC launched, another ending was added to this game. In this room, there's a fire exit that opens up and snow comes in of. If you go out that door, you can see the Pizzaplex being built across the street, and you're just in the middle of nowhere in the snow. Notably, this does imply that the Pizzaplex is built in the middle of nowhere surrounded by trees. The third possible ending is available if you collect every single hidden cassette tape in the games, in which the last one gives you the instructions to access this ending, where essentially you are warned that now that you've collected all the tapes, anytime you enter the lobby, there's a random chance that the anomaly will try to merge with your mind, and the tape gives us instructions that if we press a button, turn a lever, and I think pull a crank, essentially we can eliminate the anomaly. Once this eventually does happen, you have two choices. You either listen to those instructions or you don't. If you don't listen to the instructions or you do it incorrectly, you'll see your perspective begin to shift with the anomaly until you're looking at yourself at the computer. And then the game fades to black and you get the game over screen. Presumably, the anomaly took over your mind, and you're just put right back in the game. However, if you do the steps correctly, it doesn't get much better. Instead, you're transported into this metal doored room with a lock and handprints of someone trying to escape, and then the slide opens up to reveal the anomaly on the other side, who shushes you and fades into the darkness. It's escaped, essentially. That's ending number 3. But I mentioned we kind of have 4 endings. The Curse of Dreadbear DLC added something that feels very final, like another ending almost. Essentially, after the 3rd ending, you get a plushie of the anomaly that's all glitchy and messed up. And in the Curse of Dreadbear DLC, there's a corn maze where you collect a key and find a matching gate to leave. However, if you collect all 4 keys and then one final secret 5th key, and then make it back to the center of the maze, you can get under a secret hatch, and inside is a workshop with a white rabbit mask. You collect that mask and then you can summon it in the lobby. Once in the lobby, if you hold that glitchy anomaly plush and put on that rabbit mask, you'll hear our player having a conversation with the anomaly. Now, you can't hear the anomaly speaking, you can only hear yourself speaking, but we hear her say this.
Yes, I hear you. I know. No. There's no miscommunication. I understand. Yes, I have it. I made it myself. I think you would like it. No one suspects anything. Don't worry. I'll be ready. And I won't let you down. It will be fun.
While yes, it's technically speculation, I think it is incredibly safe to assume that the thing she made is this rabbit mask and perhaps a full costume, and that the anomaly is preparing us for something. So that's the story of Help Wanted 1. But what lore from this game is relevant to the timeline and we should put on the bulletin board? Well, let's go over that. A lot of the important lore of this game comes from the cassette tapes that you can collect while playing. But instead of just playing all 16 cassette tapes, you can find that elsewhere on YouTube, we'll just go over the important points. First of all, one incredibly important piece of lore, possibly the most important piece of lore from this game that affects the whole timeline and the bulletin board itself, one of the tapes lets us know that the whole purpose of the in-universe FNAF VR game that we are playing is Fazbear's attempt to make fun of itself and make light of the past after a rogue indie developer made a series of games tarnishing the brand. Essentially, it's Fazbear being like, yes, haha, we get it, we're kind of scary, look, let's leave that in the past and move on. But one of the tapes lets us know that Fazbear themselves hired that indie developer to make those games based off of real events in order to discredit those claims and do some elaborate cover-up. Well, bye. So we'll mark both of those down, that the indie games exist and that this VR game exists, both of which are an elaborate cover-up to cover up the past. We should also note what I said earlier, that most of the lore comes from the perspective of the previous game tester of these games. Other information we get from those logs is that Fazbear sent over old, or as is said differently in emails we'll get to, vintage technology to scan into the system to find some kind of usable code. And they do, but but after doing so is when the anomaly began to show. Much of you already know this as the story of the creation of Glitch Trap, but again, this bulletin board is just directly stated or shown information about the games. So technically, they never say Glitch Trap in this game. I won't be saying it on this section of the bulletin board. The first tester, Jeremy, lost his mind while dealing with the anomaly, culminating in some sort of incident. Now, we don't get any specific details about what happened, but these are the quotes that illuminate what most likely took place.
There has to be a lawsuit. There's no way there isn't. It happened in this building just a few doors down from me. Have you ever heard of a guillotine paper slicer? It sounds made up, but it's an actual piece of office equipment. I didn't even know we had one in the supply room. Jeremy used to do design work. I guess that's how he knew it was there. The supply room was lit. I didn't even notice Jeremy standing in the testing room as I walked past. The supply room was so bright, glowing from all the way down the hall. There was something that looked like a Halloween mask laying on the floor. I didn't understand. Ink must have spilled. I couldn't see his face. He had the visor covering his head. He had ink spilled on himself as well. The front of his shirt looked black in the dark room.
Yeah, this is a big point of speculation. For a while, I thought that Jeremy cut off his own face to get out of the VR helmet. But that doesn't quite make sense for a few reasons. First of all, the Halloween mask and ink that the cassette girl first sees is in a brightly lit room. You would think if it's a human face and blood, she would have known. I can excuse the ink on Jeremy being blood because he's in a dark room, she can't really fully see him. But ink on the ground in a brightly lit room has to be ink, so is all of it ink? Well then, what's the Halloween mask? Why did he need the guillotine paper slicer? I'm not sure. Not to mention, if he cut off his own face to get the VR helmet off, why is he still wearing it after his face is on the ground? Like, it just doesn't add up. Regardless, something happened with the guillotine paper slicer that led to a lawsuit, or what was supposed to be a lawsuit. Moving on, it's important to note that Fazbear reclaimed all of the technology that was scanned into the game after it had been scanned in, overnight seemingly and without permission. It just disappeared one day. As we collect the log cassette tapes, she notes that the anomaly begins attaching itself to them, forming an anchor into the game for itself. But when she notices this, she makes the decision to fragment her logs in order to keep the anomaly at bay, essentially splitting up its pieces so it can't be put back together. And then she records one additional log, a new one reintroducing herself and warning us to either abandon development or make sure these tapes are not found and put back together. So it's notable that the last tape completely changes course and says to collect all of the tapes and follow specific instructions. Many people believe this tape to be recorded by the anomaly. Now, I won't be putting that speculation on the bulletin board, but what we can put on the board is that the last tape completely changes course and tells you to do something different, and that the first words we hear the anomaly say are direct copy, or mimic, hint hint, of the first tape we hear.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Then further, for information on the anomaly, like I mentioned earlier, it resembles a felt suit styled to look like a yellow Bonnie, and it grows more clear and closer to the player the more tapes we collect. It should also be noted that even after we destroyed the anomaly, we're able to have a conversation with it as the player. And it also seems like the anomaly is preparing us for something. And that's the main lore of Help Wanted, but there is a lot more lore to go over still. Mainly lore just from the game and context itself. For instance, we know that this VR game is based off of in-universe indie games based off of the company. But by using the titles of certain games, the locations, characters, and even gameplay, we can assume these indie games are essentially FNAF 1 through 6, like the IRL FNAF 1 through 6. 1, 2, and 3 are fairly straightforward. Their titles are literally in-game. 4 makes a lot of sense because Night Terrors is essentially recreations of gameplay of FNAF 4. Next, I hear you, what about Sister Location and Pizzeria Simulator? Sister Location gets tricky because we don't have a lot of direct recreations of Sister Location gameplay, but what we do see is Ennard show up 2 times. By all accounts, Ennard should have only ever been seen by Michael. It's something that forms in the Sister Location bunker away from public view, enters Michael, and then escapes into the sewers when his body falls apart. Only Michael should know about this creature. So the fact that it's in-game and faithfully recreated implies that it is a Fazbear character. And if it's it's a Fazbear character, then that would mean this game has to exist, because how else would the public know about Ennard? The same logic can apply for Pizzeria Simulator. There is no gameplay of Pizzeria Simulator shown in Help Wanted. However, there is a plushie of Scrap Baby. Scrap Baby again being a character that isn't a real Fazbear character. It's the result of Circus Baby trying to rebuild herself after splitting off from Ennard. And it's something that only Henry, Michael, and maybe a few other people should have seen. Not a well-known Fazbear character that has merchandise. So if that character is known to the public, that implies Pizzeria Simulator is a game. And that's doubled down with the books that we will get to, but in those books, Pizzeria Simulator is literally name dropped. So, you know. But I hear that some of you think I'm saying Help Wanted is saying every game before now is fake and you shouldn't listen to it. And I'm not saying that, and neither is Help Wanted. It should be noted, and I'm putting it on the bulletin board, that Cassette Girl literally explicitly states that these games were recreations of real events that did happen. It's not saying these games didn't happen. What I think Help Wanted is trying to tell us in this moment, and I think it's pretty explicit, so I'm willing to put it on the bulletin board, is that these games did happen. However, they are made by an unreliable narrator, so certain details might not be accurate. The meta of this is that I think Steelwell and Scott are telling us, hey, we want to continue this story, but if something we say currently contradicts something we said previously, trust the current over the original 6 games. I think that's all that this is saying, and I think that's a fair ask. Keep in mind, some of these games are 10 years old and were made in 3 months, you know? Some other interesting lore that we should point out can be found within actual levels of the game. In the blacklight mode of Ennard Vent Repair, there is a furnace at the bottom of the level, outside of which there are Funtime animatronic shells, and inside are Endo 01 and Endo 02 endoskeletons. Somebody separated that pile to find about 4 animatronics worth. I think this is incredibly important, but I will keep my mouth shut until we get there. I did make a whole video about specifically that you can watch right here though. The pizza party level is strange and worth pointing out. I mean, I'm not sure even if this is the intended original ending for the in-universe Five Nights at Freddy's VR. It literally might be something created by the anomaly. After all, it's more of a rehash of other things already present in the game and some weird warehouse bits. It's almost like it was mimicking the game. And finally, for Help Wanted, the Curse of Dreadbird DLC takes place within Fall Fest of 1983. This is a completely new event that we still have little to no information on, but it's worth pointing out that this depiction of Fall Fest takes place next to a large red lake surrounded by trees with the FNAF 4 house in the distance, and that Dreadbear can be seen leaving the lake and entering the barn. So that's all the relevant lore I could pluck out of Help Wanted, but we are not done yet. Like I mentioned at the beginning, there's another game with lore that's relevant to bring up now, because what it lacks in quantity of lore, it makes up for in quality. FNAF Special Delivery AR has a lot of incredibly important lore, but it's lore that goes hand in hand with Help Wanted and Security Breach, and outside of this lore, there's not much else here. So there's like 4 points, but they are incredibly important points, and they come from Dark Circus and the emails. Now, I've made a full video on the Dark Circus, which you can watch right here, but in that video, I didn't talk about the emails because I wasn't focusing on it. Now it's time. As you play Five Nights at Freddy's Special Delivery, or as you could have played before the game was shut down and unplayable now, Forsaken's pretty good though, you can unlock specific emails that were supposed to stay within Fazbear and their subcontractors. Luckily, even though the game has been shut down, people have already compiled all of these emails along with emails that were never shown to the public, but were probably essentially planned to be, but never ended up getting to be. These emails sort of fall into one of 3 categories. The first one being emails from Lewis to someone named Ness, whose email is Nessie97. Lewis is in HR, and throughout these emails, it's pretty clear that he has a crush on his coworker named Ness, who we can almost for a fact assume is Vanessa. After all, Lewis implies later that she goes by VA, and she fills in the role of the Vanessa from Security Breach and the Vanessa from Help Wanted very cleanly. By the way, it's these emails that let us know our player from Help Wanted is almost certainly Vanessa. In these emails, it seems that Vanessa is switching between 2 personalities, one where she's herself and one where she is Vanny, someone we'll get to know in Security Breach, but essentially the part of her mind that is controlled by the anomaly. We also learn that she's behind another set of emails between what we assume to be the Help Wanted team. Corroborating information with what we've heard in the tapes, these emails document when the Help Wanted team team originally received the Fazbear technology, scanned it in, and got what they called the virus. It's this strange virus that begins taking over things and making things act differently. We could assume this to be the anomaly from Help Wanted. Luckily, someone from the IT of Fazbear, going by V_A, comes in and isolates the virus to one location, and then after some time removes the virus. All of the workers are thankful and celebratory, but suddenly get worried when all of their access to their systems have been locked out as well, to the point where they begin emailing from their phone because they can't even log into their computers. So we'll put a pin in there that happened, but that's not all. Lewis later tells us more info, and we get an email showing this happening. It's implied this Ness, using VA as a login with the Pizzaplex, inputs the package of this virus into the Pizzaplex system. So when we take a step back, these emails from Special Delivery literally directly tell us how Vanessa got the anomaly into the Pizzaplex system. She pretended to be Fazbear IT and isolated the anomaly from Help Wanted and extracted the virus, and then inputted the virus to the Pizzaplex systems and bypassed the security to get it into the actual computers. And then the anomaly was free to infect the entire Pizzaplex. So put a big old pin in there. Some other information we can get is how we know pretty much for a fact that this VA/Ness is Vanessa, because another email detailing workers, their birthdays, and their favorite cakes lists someone by Vanessa A, age 23, whose favorite cake is bunny-shaped cakes. That's pretty cut and dry. But notably, she's 23, and her username is Nessie97, which implies she was born in 1997. So this also implies these emails are taking place in 2020. That's very important, because a lot of people, and at different times in my life, myself included, have believed FNAF 3 takes place in 2023. After all, it's stated to be on the 30th anniversary, and we're fairly certain FNAF 1 takes place probably around 93. So 1993 plus 30, 2023. However, if these emails take place in 2020, that means FNAF 3 can't take place in 2023. FNAF 3 has to take place a long time before these emails occur. After all, FNAF 3 happens, then FNAF 6 happens, then the whole PR stunt with the indie games happen, then Help Wanted happens, and during Help Wanted and after Help Wanted is when these emails take place. So when does FNAF 3 take place? Well, I think the best runner-up option for us is 2013. We know for a fact that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was established in 1983. That's what the coin says, that's what the TV in FNAF 4 says, it just makes a lot of sense. And if Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opened in 1983, then 2013 would be a 30th year anniversary of Freddy Fazbear's. So that wraps it up with a nice bow. FNAF 3 takes place in 2013, and then FNAF 6 can't take place in 2023 either. I, for a long time, assumed FNAF 6 took place in 2023 because the log was HRY223. So like, cool, that's our date, it lines up with FNAF 3. Now it doesn't. So, I mean, maybe that's just the 223rd log that Henry left while doing this. I don't know, but you know, FNAF 6 takes place sometime in between 2013 and 2020. We'll figure more about that when we think about it. Oh, and before we end, I'm just gonna put one old big pin for all of the Dark Circus. Again, I made a whole video on it. It probably has something to do with Fredbear and Fall Fest, but you know, the Dark Circus. And that's all the pertinent timeline lore I could think of from Help Wanted and Special Delivery. And again, this is just direct information from the games without any speculation. We will be adding a lot more to this timeline besides just the cards on this bulletin board. This is just the foundation we set before we start building our house.